So I am going to create a Postgres database, and we'll see the difference between multi-AZ and read replicas in this lecture. So I'll create Postgres, and then I'll click on Next, and I'll create a dev test type of instance, and we'll enable multi-AZ on our own. If you use production, you can see that you can already have multi-AZ out of the box and provision IOPS storage, but for now we'll just do dev test and do things manually. Click on Next, and we have Postgres secure license model. This is great. The DB engine version, we can choose whatever you want. I'll use the latest 10.4 R1, and the DB instance class is going to be a t2.micro, just so I try to stay within the free tier. Now there's no guarantee we'll remain within the free tier for this lecture, but I'll try my best to do so. So we'll use T2 micro. Now for multi-AZ, I can create a replica in a different zone. And so what it means is that we'll have another replica, a standby, and it's only there for doing data redundancy, removing IO freeze, minimizing latency spikes during system backups. It's just here for disaster recovery. It's not here to scale the reads. In terms of storage type, I'll do SSD, 20 gigabyte is fine. This is the minimum we can do, so we'll just do 20 gigabytes. All right, great. Now the monthly cost is going to be this much. So be sure that if you do this tutorial, you may have to pay a lot of money for this. So you can just watch me do it otherwise. Now for the DB identifier, I'll just call it my DB. I'll make things very simple. The username, I'll call it username, admin, and then the password, I'll say password to make things very simple, because it's not the point here. And I'm happy, and passwords don't match, obviously. Okay, click on Next. Now we configure the advanced settings. So here we do default VPC, default subnet group, and then we don't want it to be, we want it to be accessible so I can access this from my own computer. But if you wanted the private, we could say no here. No preference for the AZ. And then we'll can either create a new VPC security group or choose an existing one. We'll create a new VPC security group. For the database name, I'll just have, I won't specify, I'll just specify DB, my DB. The port is fine and Postgres is fine. I won't enable IAM authentication. As we can see, we can't have encryption using this instance class, but otherwise we could have encryption. And you can only enable encryption when you start first launch this database. You cannot enable it later. We'll have 7 days of backup, and the backup will happen on the standby replica because it's multi-AZ, so the backups won't impact our performance at all. And for now, I'll disable enhanced monitoring, and I won't need to export the logs. I will not change any of these settings, and I'll go ahead and just click on Create Database. So just a quick review, and we can't use admin as a username, so I'll just go back very quickly and call it Stefan. This way I know for sure I can use it, and create database. All right, here we go. So now the database is being created, and it is a multi-AZ database. As you can see, there was no option to create a read replica just yet. I'm going to pause just until the database is being created. So my database has been created, but as you can see, now the info still says modifying. And if I go to configuration, I can see that at the very, very bottom here, multi-AZ says no. So it's not yet multi-AZ. What I have to do is actually wait, and this is what it says modifying, because the replica is going to be created, the standby replica is going to be created right now. So let me wait just a little bit more. So now my instance is in backup state, so it's actually backing up. But if you look at the recent events, so under logs and events, recent events, as you can see at 14.16, there was a modification done to make it multi-AZ automatically. And if we go to page 2, then what we'll see is that at 14.24, so about 10 minutes later, then it became a multi-AZDB instance, and then it started doing a backup. So if we look at our connectivity, our configuration, as you can see now it says multi-AZ yes. So it's really, really nice because now I know that my database has been fully multi-AZ. Now though, if we look at the endpoint and port, as you can see, it's still only one endpoint that I get. And I can see that my instance is in EU West 1B. So this is where my master instance is. Now, what if I want to show you how it works when we do a failover? So what I'm going to do is to reboot my instance right after the backing up process is done. As we can see, my instance is now available. So I'm going to do a reboot. And I'll say, yes, I want to reboot with failover. So this will basically make my instance failover to the standby. So now I'm starting the reboot. And as you can see, it's EU West 1B right now, but I expect this to change right after the reboot happens. Okay, so it took a really long time, I promise you, but now we can see that the region and AZ is EU West 1A, so just a lot of patience if you're trying to observe the same behavior. But from looking at the DNS names, you could see that the DNS name resolving behind this was changing every time I was rebooting. So now, all in all, I have the right region in AZ, EUS1A, so it has failed over between multi-AZ, and this is the behavior we wanted to see. Next, what we would like to do is to create read replicas. So for this, you have to go to Actions, Create Read Replica, and basically you can start creating your read replicas from this instance. So you can say any region you want. I'll keep the same region, but this is where you can have cross-region read replica, as I said. Then you can select a subnet group. I'll use the default one. AZ, you could have a preference. So maybe because my 1A, I have 1B, maybe I'll create 1C in there. You can say whether or not this instance should be publicly accessible. I'll say yes. Here you can enable or disable encryption. I'll just leave it as disabled. You can choose the DB instance class, and you can say whether or not you want your read replica to be multi-AZ. I will say no for this time. I'll use SSD, and then you have to specify the source identifier of the database you want to replicate. I'll use MyDB, and this is good. So now you can say a database instance identifier, so I'll call it MyDB replica. At least I know it's the replica. And the database port is going to be the exact same. I can even copy tags to snapshots, but I will disable it. I can enable monitoring. I'll just keep it disabled and click on maintenance. As you can see, it's a very similar creation screen that we had before from RDS, but now we're creating a read replica. So I'm going to create that. And now, as you can see in the bottom, so when you go under connectivity at the very bottom, as you can see now we have MyDB, which is the master. We actually don't get to see the standby for multi-AZ, we just don't get to see it here, but we see a read replica right here. So MyDB replica is a replica, and if I click on it, now I'm able to go to the console for my read replica, and you can see the state right now is creating, and it will soon give me an endpoint and a port. You can also see this by going into databases, and as you can see now, we have basically two databases appearing right here. One is a master, and one is a replica. And right now it's in the creating state. So I'll just wait a little bit until this is done. Okay, so my database and my database replica are now available. And you could always click on this plus minus to basically fall down. But as we can see, this is a replica of MyDB because it just rolls up on the MyDB. And so what I'm going to do is open a database, and we're just going to test replication. So for this, I'm going to take this endpoint, and I'm going to take the replica endpoint and connect to it using my SQL editor. Okay, so I'm going to establish connectivity to my first database instance. So for this, I'm going to go and add a new connection. The name is going to be MyDB. The database type is going to be Postgres. The address is what I just copied. The user is going to be Stefan. The password is going to be password. The initial database is going to be Postgres. And I think I'm good. I'll click on test, and it says successfully connected. I'll save it. If you don't get a successful connection, check your security groups. Okay, so now I can add another database. And this time, this will be my read replica. So I'll call it MyDB replica. So I'll just copy this, and I'll call this MyDB replica. And the database type is Postgres, and I'll use the same username, so Stefan. And the password is going to be password, and the initial database is going to be Postgres. Click on test, successful as well, so I can connect to my replica. So what I'm going to do is just connect to my first, my first database. So I'll say create database, and I'll just call it DB, MyDB, or something like this. And then I will execute my statements. So now I've created a new database, and in there I can go ahead and I will create basically some tables. Then I'll just go to my file, create table.sql. So I'll create a table named films into MyDB. So just make sure you have the MyDB open, click on execute, and now it's successful. So I have public.films, that's a table that's available for me. And now we'll just go ahead and insert one film into it. So I'll just copy the statement and insert some data. So I've affected one row. So now if I go to this and click select, basically it's just going to show me that indeed I have my data into this table. So public films, there has been some data. So now let's see if I get the exact same thing in the other database. So for this, I'm going to go to MyDB replica, connect. And as you can see, we already have a MyDB database that has been created. And within MyDB, there's a public films. And if I select from public films, I find the exact same data. So my read replica is working. And as you can see, it has replicated the data right away. So it's pretty awesome. And that just demonstrates how read replica works. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next lecture.